The grainy footage flickered on Sarah's phone screen, sent by her neighbor, Mark, with a single chilling line. "Sarah, check your porch cam now. You're here listening, and that means more than you know. If you feel safe in these stories, your one subscribe helps me keep this quiet little corner alive. Thank you for being part of this peaceful world." Her thumb hovered over the play button, the weight of the unopened video a cold stone in her stomach. Outside, the relentless August heat pressed against the windows of her small suburban bungalow like a living thing. Cicadas screamed in the pines, a sound that usually spoke of lazy afternoons but now felt like a grating alarm. Inside, the air conditioning hummed a futile battle, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and the faint, lingering sweetness of the banana her 2-year-old Ollie had squashed into the rug hours ago. Dust motes danced in the harsh afternoon, light slanting through the blinds, illuminating the chaos of toddler life. Scattered blocks, a lone, forlorn sock, a board book splayed open, showing a cheerful cow that felt like a mockery. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the living room rug, the worn fibers scratchy beneath her bare feet. Her knuckles were white around the phone. Ollie was safe, napping in his room down the hall, his soft, even breaths just audible over the AC's drone. But the dread emanating from that unplayed video was a physical force, rooting her to the spot. It felt like standing on the crumbling edge of something vast and terrifying. The world had already tilted once for Sarah. 18 months ago. It was a phone call that did it, the kind that stops time. Her husband, Ben, vibrant and seemingly invincible Ben, felled by an aneurysm during his morning run. Gone. Just like that. The carefully constructed life of career, weekend plans, and future dreams dissolved into a haze of grief, bewildered toddler questions, and the sheer exhausting mechanics of survival. She was adrift in her own home, a ghost moving through rooms, filled with Ben's absence, his favorite mug gathering dust, his running shoes still by the door where he'd kicked them off that last morning. Ollie was her anchor, her reason to keep breathing, but the weight of being solely responsible for this fragile, beautiful life was crushing. The loneliness was a constant ache, a hollow space no well-meaning friend's casserole could fill. She felt perpetually on the verge of breaking, a vase cracked but still holding water, terrified the next jolt would shatter her completely. And then, 3 weeks ago, the cat had appeared. It wasn't a dramatic arrival, just there, a shadow at the periphery. Sarah first noticed her late one evening, a week after the anniversary of Ben's death. She'd been sitting on the back porch steps, staring into the darkness, tears drying cold on her cheeks, the silence of the house behind her amplifying the emptiness inside. A movement caught her eye near the overgrown hydrangea bush at the corner of the yard. 2 points of reflected green light, low to the ground, watching. Sarah froze, the hair on her arms prickling. The eyes held steady, unblinking. Then, a soft rustle, and the shadow detached itself, becoming a small, lean tabby cat. Classic markings, swirling stripes of brown and charcoal on gray, a white chest and paws. But it was her bearing that struck Sarah. Not feral skittishness, but a profound, weary wariness. She moved with a quiet dignity, each step deliberate, her tail held low but not tucked. She paused at the edge of the porch light's reach, just beyond the circle of yellow. Illumination, a creature of the twilight. She didn't meow, didn't beg, just sat, and watched Sarah with those unreadable green eyes. Sarah had whispered, "Hey there," her voice thick. The cat didn't flinch, didn't move, just watched, as if assessing the level of threat, the depth of the sadness emanating from the woman on the steps. After a long minute, she turned with silent grace and melted back into the shadows beneath the hydrangea. Since then, the tabby had become a fixture. Sarah started calling her Shade in her mind because she always seemed to linger just outside the brightest light. She'd appear at different times, early morning mist clinging to her fur as she sat sentinel by the back fence. Late afternoon, a still silhouette beneath the oak tree as Ollie giggled and chased bubbles Sarah blew for him. Twilight, those luminous eyes observing from the bushes as Sarah wrestled the trash cans to the curb. Shade never approached, never came closer than 10 feet. She'd accept water Sarah left out in a chipped cereal bowl placed near the hydrangea bush, lapping delicately, eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Sometimes Sarah would see her meticulously cleaning a paw, the rasp of her tongue audible in the quiet. Other times, she'd simply sit, statue still, gazing not at Sarah's house, but past it, down the quiet street, or up into the branches of the old oak, as if waiting for something, or someone. Sarah found herself looking for her, scanning the yard first thing in the morning, peeking out the kitchen window while washing dishes. Her presence, this silent, watchful ghost, became a strange kind of comfort, a witness to her solitude, a reminder that life, in its quiet, persistent way, continued outside her bubble of grief. Ollie noticed her too. "Kitty!" he'd exclaim, pointing a chubby finger whenever he spotted the motionless form under the oak or near the fence. He'd try to toddle towards her, but Shade would always melt away before he got close, vanishing with a fluidity that seemed almost supernatural. Sarah would scoop him up, murmuring, "She's a shy kitty, sweet pea. We just watch." But the watching felt significant. It felt like the beginning of something fragile and unnamed. Now standing in the stifling living room chaos, the dread. Coiling tighter with each passing second, Sarah's thoughts flickered to Shade. Had she been out there earlier? Sarah couldn't recall. The afternoon was a blur of snack negotiations, tantrums, and the desperate attempt to carve out 5 minutes of silence. The unplayed video on her phone felt like a direct line to that terrifying edge. Mark wouldn't send it without reason. Something had happened, something involving Ollie. The porch cam. It pointed towards the front walk, the driveway, where Ollie played with his little plastic truck, where the mailman came, where the world brushed up against their fragile sanctuary. Taking a shuddering breath that did nothing to calm the frantic hammering of her heart, Sarah lifted the phone. The screen felt slick in her sweaty palm. She tapped the video thumbnail. The timestamp in the corner read 3:17 p.m., just over an hour ago. Ollie had been playing on the porch while Sarah ran inside to grab his water cup. She'd been gone maybe 90 seconds? The footage showed the familiar scene. The sun-drenched porch, Ollie's bright red truck abandoned near the steps, Ollie himself, clad in tiny blue shorts and a faded dinosaur t-shirt, toddling towards the edge of the porch, captivated by a butterfly flitting near the azaleas. The sound was tinny, compressed, but the cicadas were a relentless backdrop. Then, movement from the right. Fast. A blur of tan and white streaking into the frame from the neighbor's yard. A large dog. A boxer, maybe? Sarah didn't know the dog. It moved with a terrifying, single-minded energy, head low, muscles bunching. It wasn't barking. It was silent, intent. Heading straight for Ollie, who had just stepped off the porch onto the walkway, utterly oblivious, his chubby hand outstretched towards the butterfly. Sarah's breath hitched, a strangled sound escaping her throat. Time stretched, elastic and agonizing. The dog covered the distance in seconds. Ollie turned, sensing the movement, his little face registering first curiosity, then dawning confusion. The dog was almost upon him, jaws opening wide in a silent snarl on the screen. Sarah's vision blurred. This was it, the shattering. The moment she failed Ben, the moment she lost everything. A scream was building in her chest, trapped, silent. But then, From the bottom left corner of the frame, a smaller blur exploded. A streak of gray and brown and white, moving with impossible speed. A silent missile launched from the hydrangea bushes. It crossed the lawn in a heartbeat, a low-slung, muscular torpedo. Shade. She didn't yowl, didn't hiss on the video. She simply hit the side of the charging dog with the full, shocking force of her small body, a flying tackle that knocked the larger animal sideways just as its jaws would have closed around Ollie's leg. The impact was audible even through the phone's speaker. A solid, sickening thud. The dog yelped, surprised, stumbling off balance. Ollie, knocked sideways by the glancing force of Shade's leap, landed hard on his padded bottom on the grass, starting to wail in shock and fear. The scene descended into chaos. The dog, momentarily stunned, whipped its head around, snapping at the small cat now clinging to its flank with claws sunk deep. Shade was a whirlwind of teeth and claws, a furious spitting ball of fur, her back arched, ears flattened against her skull, eyes blazing with feral intensity. She wasn't backing down. She was holding on, ripping and biting, her movements a desperate, vicious dance. The dog, confused and enraged by this sudden, painful assault, bucked and twisted, trying to dislodge the tenacious tabby. It managed to fling her off. Shade landed hard on her side on the walkway, rolling, but instantly scrambled back to her feet, placing herself squarely between the dazed, crying toddler and the snarling dog. She was panting, her sides heaving, a trickle of dark blood visible, near her ear. But she stood her ground. Her tail was a furious bottle brush, her body low and coiled, every line screaming defiance. She didn't retreat an inch. She stared down the much larger animal, a low, continuous growl emanating from her throat. A sound Sarah had never heard before, primal and terrifying. The dog hesitated. The sheer, unexpected ferocity of the small cat's attack seemed to have momentarily broken its focus. It took a half step back, then another, still growling, confused. That hesitation was all it took. Mark's voice suddenly boomed from off-camera, loud and commanding. "Hey! Get out of here! Go on! Get!" He appeared in the frame, waving his arms, his face a mask of fury. The dog, its bravado shattered, turned and bolted back towards its own yard. Mark rushed to Ollie, scooping the sobbing toddler into his arms, checking him over frantically. Sarah watched, her own tears finally spilling over hot and fast, tracking paths through the dust on her cheeks. Ollie was safe, bruised, scared, but safe. Her eyes, blurred with tears, snapped back to the small figure still standing guard on the walkway. Shade. The tabby watched the dog disappear. Her fierce stance slowly relaxed, muscle by muscle. The growl subsided. She turned her head, her green eyes finding Ollie cradled in Mark's arms, his cries softening to hiccups. Then, Shade looked directly at the porch camera, right into the lens, right at Sarah, watching through time, her gaze held for a long, unnerving second. Exhaustion warred with something else in those green depths. Resolve? A question? Sarah couldn't tell. Then, without a sound, Shade turned. She limped slightly, favoring her left front leg, and disappeared, back into the deep green shadows beneath the hydrangea bushes. Gone. The video ended. Sarah stood in the silent living room. The only sound Ollie's soft snores from down the hall and the relentless hum of the AC. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering onto the rug next to the squashed banana. The grainy images. Burned behind her eyes, the dog charging, Ollie's innocent confusion, the terrifying moment of impact, Shade's small, fierce body taking the blow meant for her child, her unwavering stand, the blood, the limp. Relief, cold and dizzying, washed over her, followed immediately by a surge of nausea. Ollie was safe, but Shade was hurt. She'd been bleeding, limping. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. The silent tabby, the watcher. From the shadows, the creature who kept her distance had thrown herself into the jaws of danger for Ollie. Why? The question echoed in the hollow space Ben's absence had left. Who was this cat? Where had she come from? And what had driven her to risk everything? Sarah sank to her knees on the rug, the rough fibers scraping her skin. She stared at the spot where her phone had fallen, the screen now dark. The comfortable distance, the quiet observation, was over. Something fundamental had shifted. The tabby wasn't just a shadow anymore. She was a hero, and she was hurt. Sarah needed to find her. She had to find her. The quiet vigil had ended. The search was beginning. The world had shrunk to the frantic beating of her own heart, and the suffocating scent of crushed mint and warm earth beneath the hydrangea bushes. Sarah crawled, heedless of the dirt staining her knees, the sharp twigs snagging her shorts, the sweat stinging her eyes. Shade? Her voice was a raw scrape, barely audible over the frantic buzzing in her ears and the relentless cicada drone. "Kitty, please! Where are you?" The dense green foliage offered only shifting shadows, the late afternoon sun dappling the ground in deceptive patterns. Panic, cold and slick, threatened to drown her. The image of that small, limping form vanishing into these very bushes replayed on a loop behind her eyes, superimposed with the grainy footage of the impact, the sickening thud, the flash of teeth, Shade's tiny body flung aside. Ollie's cries, now soft hiccups in Mark's arms just yards away, were a constant reminder of what had almost been lost and what had been sacrificed. She was here, bleeding, hurt, because of us. The thought was a physical blow. Sarah pushed, deeper, her fingers trembling as she parted thick stems. The earthy smell intensified, mixed with the faint, metallic tang she feared was blood. "Shade?" she whispered again, desperation making her throat tight. "It's me, Sarah, Ollie's mom. Please, let me help you." The silence beneath the hydrangea felt heavier than before, charged with pain and fear. She scanned the gloom, her eyes adjusting. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement, deep in the corner where the bushes met the cool foundation of the house. Not a rustle of leaves, but the slow, deliberate shift of fur against dirt. Crouched low, pressed into the darkest recess was Shade. Sarah froze. The cat's green eyes were wide open, fixed on her, but they weren't watchful anymore. They were clouded with pain and a deep, wary exhaustion. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, each inhale visibly shuddering through her small frame. The trickle of dark blood Sarah had seen near her ear on the video was more evident now, matting the fur along her jawline. Her left front leg was held awkwardly, tucked close to her body, the fur stained dark. She didn't growl, didn't hiss, she just watched. But the stillness was different. It wasn't her usual quiet observation. It was the stillness of an animal conserving every ounce of energy, poised for flight despite the agony. Sarah could see the tension thrumming through her, the slight tremor in her hunched shoulders. She looked impossibly small, vulnerable in a way Sarah had never imagined the dignified watcher could be. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah breathed, the endearment slipping. Out unbidden, thick with unshed tears. She didn't move closer. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered herself from her crawling position until she was sitting cross-legged on the damp earth just outside the densest part of the bush. The coolness seeped through her shorts. She kept her hands visible, palms open, and resting on her knees. The scent of damp soil and bruised mint filled her nostrils, grounding her slightly against the wave of nausea and guilt. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice deliberately soft, a low hum beneath the cicadas. "You're safe now. The dog's gone. Ollie's safe, because of you." She repeated the words, a soothing mantra. because of you." Shade's gaze didn't waver. Her ears, usually pricked forward with alert curiosity, were flattened slightly against her skull. The only movement was the rapid rise and fall of her ribcage. Sarah noticed for the first time the intricate pattern of her stripes, not just random swirls, but distinct bands of charcoal and warm brown, like tiger stripes miniaturized, interspersed with softer gray. The white on her chest was stark, against the darker fur. She saw the slight notch in her left ear, a badge of a past skirmish. She saw the dust clinging to her fur, the tiny burr caught near her tail. She saw the absolute exhaustion etched into every line of her small body. Minutes stretched, the shadows lengthened. Sarah sat, her own breathing gradually slowing to match the rhythm she tried to project. Calm, steady. She talked softly, nonsense mostly, about Ollie being okay, about the stupidly hot August day, about the hydrangeas needing a trim. She avoided direct eye contact, letting her gaze drift to the patch of lawn visible beyond the bushes, to Ollie now sitting quietly on Mark's lap on the porch steps, clutching his red truck. Mark met Sarah's eyes across the distance and gave a small, reassuring nod. Ollie was physically unharmed, just shaken. Then the tiniest shift. Shade's intense stare softened, just a fraction. Her eyelids lowered, not in a blink, but in a slow, deliberate droop. A slow blink. Sarah's breath caught. She'd read about that somewhere. A cat's sign of trust, or just sheer fatigue. She mirrored it. Slowly, deliberately, she closed. Her eyes for a full second, then opened them. Shade's eyes were still half-lidded, watching. Sarah did it again. Close. Open. Shade's breathing seemed to slow infinitesimally. Her head lowered a fraction, resting more heavily on her uninjured forepaw. The rigid tension in her shoulders eased, just a little. It wasn't relaxation. It was the posture of an animal too wounded to maintain full vigilance, forced to accept the presence of the giant, clumsy creature sitting just outside its hiding place. Hope, fragile as a spiderweb, glimmered in Sarah's chest. "Okay?" she whispered. "Okay, Shade, just rest. I'm right here." She stayed perfectly still, the damp earth chilling her legs, the scent of the cat's fear and blood a sharp counterpoint to the sweet garden smells. She noticed the delicate curve of Shade's whiskers, the way they twitched ever so slightly with each shallow breath. She saw the tiny flecks of gold in her green irises. She saw the dried blood caking the fur near her ear, a stark, violent contrast to the softness beneath. The urge to reach out, to scoop her up and rush her to help, was a physical ache. But the wary exhaustion in those green eyes held her back. One wrong move, and Shade would bolt, injury or not. She'd vanish into the neighborhood, bleeding, hurting, alone. Sarah couldn't risk it. She sat. Time lost meaning. The cicadas reached their fever pitch and then began to subside as the sun dipped lower, casting long, cool shadows. The air grew marginally less oppressive. Ollie, lulled by the aftermath of adrenaline, fell asleep against Mark's shoulder. Mark carefully carried him inside, murmuring to Sarah that he'd put him in his crib. Sarah just nodded, her focus entirely on the small, wounded creature in the shadows. The light changed, softening to the gold of late afternoon. Sarah's legs were numb, her back stiff. She shifted slightly, wincing. Shade's eyes snapped fully open, instantly alert, her body tensing. Sarah froze. "Shh," she soothed. "Just me. Just stretching, not coming closer. Promise." She held her breath. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Shade relaxed again. Her eyes drifted shut, this time for longer than a blink. She was sleeping, or passed out from pain and exhaustion. Sarah's heart clenched. The sight of the small cat, vulnerable in sleep, trusting her enough to close her eyes while Sarah sat just feet away. It unlocked something deep and primal within her. A fierce protectiveness surged, washing over the lingering panic. This cat, this silent ghost who had watched her grief from afar, had thrown herself into hell for her child. Sarah would sit in this dirt until the stars came out if that's what it took. She would not let her down. When the light had turned the deep blue of twilight and fireflies began to wink like tiny stars in the gathering gloom, Sarah knew she had to act. Shade hadn't moved, hadn't drunk from the water bowl Sarah had nudged closer hours ago. Her breathing seemed shallower. The fear of infection, of internal injuries, was a cold knot in Sarah's stomach. She needed supplies. Quietly, moving with glacial slowness, she stood up. Her muscles screamed in protest. Shade's eyes flew open, wide with renewed alarm. She tried to push herself up, a low sound of pain escaping her, not a meow, but a thin, distressed whimper. "No, no, sweetheart, stay," Sarah pleaded, her voice thick. "I'm not leaving you, I promise. I'm just going to get something to help. I'll be right back. Right back." She backed away slowly, keeping her eyes on Shade, murmuring reassurances. She reached the porch steps, her legs trembling, and practically ran inside, leaving the back door open. She grabbed the first aid kit from under the kitchen sink, woefully inadequate, she knew. A clean towel, a shallow dish, and filled. A bowl with fresh, cool water. Her hands shook as she fumbled. Back outside, the twilight had deepened. Sarah approached the hydrangea bush with the reverence of someone entering a sanctuary. Shade was still there, still crouched, but her eyes tracked Sarah's every move with exhausted intensity. Sarah knelt again, a few feet away. She placed the bowl of water just inside the edge of the bush, within Shade's reach but not forcing proximity. "Water," she murmured. "Nice and cool." She laid the towel and the first aid kit beside her. Shade watched the bowl, her nostrils flaring slightly at the scent of fresh water. Her tongue flicked out, rasping over dry lips, but she didn't move. Towards it. Sarah opened the first aid kit. The rustle of the plastic sounded unnaturally loud. Shade flinched. Sarah froze. "Sorry," she whispered. "Just trying to see what I've got." Gauze pads, antiseptic wipes, medical tape. Useless for anything serious, but maybe she could clean the visible wounds. The blood near her ear looked dried, clumped. The leg... Sarah couldn't even see the extent of the injury. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Sarah picked up an antiseptic wipe. The sharp, medicinal smell cut through the garden air. Shades. Ears flattened completely. She pressed herself further back into the corner, a low, warning growl rumbling in her chest. It was weak, strained, but unmistakable. Fear. Sarah's heart sank. She couldn't force this. She couldn't terrify her further. She lowered the wipe, setting it down. "Okay," she said, her voice cracking. "Okay. No wipes. Not now." She looked at the small, terrified creature, then at the inadequate supplies. Defeat washed over her, cold and heavy. She was failing her. Just sitting here wasn't enough. Shade needed a vet. Now. But how? The thought of trying to trap her, to force her into a carrier, Shade would fight. She'd hurt herself more. She might escape and never be found. Tears welled up, hot and stinging. Sarah dropped her head into her hands, the despair of the past 18 months crashing over her anew, amplified by this fresh helplessness. Ben would have known what to do. Ben had always known how to fix things, how to stay calm. He'd have charmed this wary cat. He'd have... A sob escaped her, muffled by her hands. She was so tired, so alone, so utterly incapable of protecting the things that mattered. First Ben, then almost Ollie, and now this small, brave soul who had saved him. She couldn't save her in return. She cried quietly, shoulders shaking, the weight of grief and fear and guilt too much to bear. The sounds of the night settled around her. Crickets chirping, a distant dog barking, the soft sigh of the wind in the pines. She didn't know how long she sat like that, lost in the dark well of her own inadequacy. Then, a sound pierced through her tears. Not a growl, not a hiss. A sound so soft, so tentative, she almost missed it. "Mert?" Sarah lifted her head, blinking, tears away. Shade was still in her corner, but her head was tilted slightly. Her ears weren't flattened anymore, they were swiveled forward, listening. Her green eyes watched Sarah, not with fear now, but with curiosity? Concern? The low growl was gone. The rigid tension had eased again. It was as if Sarah's raw display of emotion had shifted something. The cat's vulnerability mirrored her own. "Shade?" Sarah whispered, wiping her cheeks with the back of her dirty hand. The tabby shifted, very slowly. She stretched her neck forward, just a fraction, sniffing the air towards Sarah. Then, with visible effort, she dragged herself a few inches out, of the deepest shadow, closer to the bowl of water Sarah had placed. Her injured leg barely touched the ground. She lowered her head, her movements stiff and painful, and began to lap at the water. The sound was loud in the quiet twilight, small, desperate gulps. Sarah held her breath, tears still wet on her face. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched, a fragile hope blooming in her chest like the first star appearing in the darkening sky. Shade drank deeply, thirstily, her sides heaving slightly between laps. When she finally lifted her head, water droplets clung to her whiskers. She looked at Sarah again, not through her, at her. Her gaze held Sarah's for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lowered her head not back to the ground, but onto her uninjured paw, her body still partly facing Sarah. Her eyes drifted half-closed, not sleeping but resting, guardedly, acceptingly. She didn't retreat back, into the dark corner. The message was subtle, profound. I am hurt. I am vulnerable. But I am here, with you. It wasn't trust earned, but a truce offered. A fragile bridge built not on treats or coaxing, but on shared trauma, on the raw, unspoken understanding of pain and protection. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest, pushing back the icy despair. It wasn't a solution. Shade still needed urgent care. But in that quiet twilight moment, with the scent of damp earth and antiseptic lingering, and the small wounded cat choosing to rest within her sight, Sarah understood something fundamental. The silent vigil was over. The quiet watching had become something else, something deeper, messier, and infinitely more real. The bond hadn't been built on sun-dappled afternoons or playful approaches. It had been forged in the white-hot terror of attack and the shared, trembling aftermath. And Shade, the watcher, the ghost, the hero, had just taken the first painful step across the divide. Sarah would meet her there. She had to. "I'm right here, Shade," she murmured, her voice thick but steady now. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time since Ben died, sitting in the dirt under a hydrangea bush beside a wounded stray, Sarah didn't feel entirely alone. Have you ever felt an animal see you? Truly see you? Not just your actions, but the storm inside? The rhythm of the house changed. It wasn't a loud change, not a clanging cymbal, but a subtle shift in tempo, like a heartbeat finding a steadier pace after a fright. Ollie bounced back with the resilient elasticity of toddlers, his brief terror, replaced by wide-eyed fascination with the brave kitty who lived under the bush. Sarah, however, carried the echoes of that afternoon like a phantom limb, the chilling dread, the surge of adrenaline, the crushing helplessness, and the overwhelming, bone-deep gratitude that had washed over her as she sat in the dirt beside a wounded hero. Life didn't magically become easy. The grief for Ben was still a familiar ache in her chest. a hollow space she navigated daily. The exhaustion of single parenting still dragged at her bones. But now, there was Shade. Shade hadn't magically transformed into a cuddly lap cat either. The trust forged in the twilight under the hydrangea was profound, but it was also fragile, born of shared trauma and mutual need. Sarah had managed, over several painstaking evenings, to coax Shade out from her bush sanctuary using the irresistible lure of high-quality wet food, a significant upgrade from the kibble scraps she'd offered before. She'd set up a sheltered, padded box on the covered back porch, lined with soft fleece blankets Sarah had warmed in the dryer. Shade accepted it warily, her green eyes tracking Sarah's every move. The first time Sarah gently cleaned the clotted blood from her jawline and ear with a warm, damp cloth, no scary antiseptic wipes yet, Shade had tensed, a low vibration starting in her chest. But she hadn't fled. She'd endured it, her gaze fixed on Sarah's face, her small body trembling slightly. The leg injury thankfully wasn't broken, but badly bruised and strained. Sarah could see the tenderness when Shade moved, the slight hesitation before putting weight on it. The porch became neutral ground. Shade would emerge cautiously at dusk, drawn by the scent of food Sarah placed near her box. She'd eat with focused intensity, her head low, ears swiveling constantly to monitor the surroundings. Afterwards, she'd often retreat to her box, but sometimes she'd linger. She'd sit on the edge of the porch, silhouetted against the fading light, her gaze fixed not on Sarah or Ollie playing inside through the screen door, but out towards the street or down the side yard towards the old oak tree. It was the same watchful posture Sarah remembered from before the attack, but intensified. There was a weight to it now, a deep, restless scanning that went beyond simple feline alertness. If this gentle story brought even a tiny smile or calm to your heart, would you consider subscribing? It helps me keep sharing these soft moments, for you and for anyone who needs peace tonight. Sarah found herself talking softly to Shade during these quiet evenings, not demanding attention, just narrating the mundane. Ollie tried to eat crayons today, blue ones, looked like a tiny Smurf. Or, Mrs. Henderson called again, wants me to join her book club. Thinks it'll be good for me. She'd sigh, leaning against the porch railing, the warm wood rough under her palms. Maybe she's right. Or maybe I just want to sit out here with you. Shade would rarely look at her during these monologues, but Sarah noticed the subtle signs, the slight flick of an ear towards her voice, the way her tail would stop its restless twitching for a moment, the slow, deliberate blinks she'd started, offering more frequently, especially when Sarah mirrored them. It felt like conversation, silent and profound. One evening, as Sarah refilled Shade's water bowl with cool, fresh water, she noticed something glinting faintly in the dirt near. The base of the hydrangea bush, right where Shade's hiding spot had been. Curious, she crouched down, pushing aside a low-hanging leaf. It was a small, tarnished metal object. She picked it up, brushing off the damp earth. It was a key, old-fashioned brass with a simple, slightly ornate bow. Not a modern house key. It looked familiar in a way she couldn't place, like something from her grandmother's time. She held it up, frowning. Where had it come from? Had it been buried? Had Shade brought it? She glanced at Shade, who was watching her from her perch on the porch step, her expression inscrutable. "Did you find this girl?" Sarah asked softly. Shade just blinked slowly, then turned her head to resume her vigil down the side yard. Sarah pocketed the key, a tiny seed of curiosity taking root. It felt like the first tangible piece of the mystery surrounding this cat. The bond deepened in small, precious increments. Shade began allowing Sarah closer during her porch-sitting vigils. Sarah would sit on the top step, reading a book or just sipping tea, leaving a careful 3-foot, buffer between them. Shade would groom herself with meticulous care, the rasp of her tongue loud in the quiet evening air. Sarah learned the specific texture of her fur. Not silky like a long hair, but dense and plush, the stripes feeling slightly coarser under her fingertips. When Shade finally allowed a tentative touch on her back one evening, Sarah had held her breath, moving with glacial slowness, and Shade had stiffened for a second before relaxing infinitesimally, her grooming pausing only momentarily. She smelled of sun-warmed dust, dry grass, and a faint, wild musk beneath. The heat radiating from her small body when she finally chose to curl up on the porch mat near Sarah's feet was surprising, a little furnace emanating comfort. Ollie was desperate to interact. "Kitty! Nice kitty!" he'd chirp, pressing his face against the screen door. Shade remained wary of his unpredictable movements and loud noises. She'd watch him with calm detachment, sometimes offering a slow blink in his direction, but she'd retreat to her box if he got too boisterous. Yet, Sarah noticed something. One afternoon, Ollie was crying inconsolably over a broken toy truck wheel. Sarah was trying to soothe him in the kitchen when she glanced out the window. Shade was sitting on the porch railing, perfectly still, her green eyes fixed on the distressed toddler inside. Her ears were pricked forward, her tail held low but still. It wasn't fear. It was attention. Focused attention. As if she was monitoring Ollie's distress. When his cries finally subsided into hiccups, Shade visibly relaxed, her shoulders lowering, her gaze shifting back to the yard. Do you think animals know when we're at our lowest? Not just physically, but when our hearts are aching? The key nagged at Sarah. She found herself looking at it often, turning it over in her palm, its cool weight a persistent question. She asked Mark if he recognized it. He squinted at it. Old shed key, maybe? Looks like the kind old Mr. Peterson had for his garden shed before he passed. But that shed's long gone. He shrugged. Why? Where'd you find it? Sarah just mumbled something about finding it in the garden. Then Shade's behavior shifted again. She started disappearing. Not for long at first, an hour here, 2 hours there, but always returning to the porch for food, water, and her evening vigil. Sarah would call her name softly, and sometimes after a delay, Shade would emerge from beneath the hydrangea or from behind the garage, her expression unreadable. Other times, she wouldn't appear until dusk. The absences grew longer. One Saturday morning, Shade vanished after breakfast and didn't return until late afternoon. Sarah felt an irrational spike of anxiety, pacing the kitchen, peering out windows. When Shade finally slunk back onto the porch, she looked different. Not hurt, but intensely preoccupied. Her fur was dusty. A small burr caught in her tail, and she headed straight for her water bowl, drinking thirstily. She ignored Sarah's soft greeting, her gaze distant, focused inward. Worse, she started refusing to come close on certain evenings. She'd eat the food Sarah put out, but instead of lingering on the porch, she'd retreat immediately to her bush, her body language closed off, tense. She'd sit just inside the foliage, her green eyes gleaming in the shadows, watching Sarah, with an intensity that felt different from her usual vigilance. It felt wary again, guarded, as if the tentative trust was fraying. Sarah couldn't pinpoint a reason. Had she moved too fast, made a sudden noise that startled her? Was she in pain again? She'd examined Shade from a distance, but the cat seemed physically fine, moving more fluidly as her leg healed. The mystery deepened, twisting into anxiety. Had she imagined the connection? Was Shade regretting her decision to stay? The key felt heavier in Sarah's pocket. She started paying closer attention to where Shade went during her absences. From an upstairs window, she'd catch glimpses of the tabby moving with purposeful stealth down the side yard, slipping through a gap in the back fence that led towards the overgrown lot 2 houses down, a property that had been vacant for years, since old Mrs. Gable passed away. The house stood dark and silent, its windows boarded, the garden a tangle of weeds and volunteer saplings. One evening, the anxiety coalesced into a sharp point. Shade hadn't come for her dinner. The light faded, the fireflies emerged, and the porch remained empty. Sarah called softly, then a bit louder. Nothing. The silence pressed in, thick and unsettling. Ollie was in bed. The house felt too quiet, too big. Sarah stood on the porch, the unease she'd been fighting all day solidifying into cold dread. Shade always came for dinner. Always. Even on her distant days. Something was wrong. Driven by a fear she couldn't name, Sarah grabbed a flashlight. She didn't bother with shoes, just stepped off the porch into the cool, dewy grass. She moved quietly towards the side yard, towards the gap in the fence Shade used. The beam of her flashlight cut a shaky path through the deepening gloom. Crickets chirped. A lone owl hooted in the distance. She reached the fence, a rickety wooden structure choked with ivy. Pushing aside the thick vines, she squeezed through the gap. The vacant lot was a different world at night. Wild and shadowed, the overgrown grass reaching her knees, dampening the hem of her pajama pants. The silhouette of Mrs. Gable's old house loomed ahead, dark and skeletal. Sarah swept the flashlight beam across the tangled vegetation. "Shade?" she whispered, her voice swallowed by the vast quiet. "Shade, where are you?" Nothing moved. The air felt still, heavy. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This felt foolish, dangerous even. What was she doing, trespassing in a dark, abandoned lot looking for a cat? But the image of Shade, hurt and alone, pushed her forward. She took another step, the grass rustling loudly. The beam caught the crumbling back steps of the old house, the sagging porch. And there, near the base of the steps, half hidden by tall weeds, was a flicker of movement, gray fur. Sarah's breath caught. "Shade!" She moved closer, carefully. The beam settled on the tabby. Shade was crouched low, not in her usual watchful pose, but in a posture of intense concentration. She was digging, not playfully, but with fierce, focused purpose, her front paws working rapidly at a spot near the corner of the concrete step foundation. Dirt flew. She was utterly absorbed, oblivious to Sarah's approach or the flashlight beam. Sarah stopped, frozen, 10 feet away. What was she doing? Burying something? Trying to unearth something? Shade paused, panting slightly, her head lowered. She nudged at the dirt with her nose, then resumed digging, her movements frantic now. Sarah took another cautious step. The beam illuminated something else near Shade's digging spot. Not dirt, something pale, partially uncovered. A small, curved shape. Porcelain? Sarah squinted, her pulse roaring in her ears. It looked like the broken edge of a saucer? Or Shade suddenly froze. Not because she saw Sarah. Her head snapped up, ears pricked forward, not towards Sarah, but towards the dark, boarded-up house itself. A low, guttural sound vibrated from her throat. Not a growl, not a hiss. It was a sound Sarah had never heard before. A mournful, questioning chirrup, full of longing, desperation. She stared intently at the dark space beneath the sagging porch steps, her whole body rigid with expectation, as if willing something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Sarah held her breath, the flashlight beam trembling slightly, illuminating Shade's tense profile, the frantic little hole she'd dug, and the edge of that pale, buried object. The mystery wasn't just about where Shade went anymore. It was about why. Why this place? What lay buried here? And who or what was Shade calling out to in the silent dark? The mournful chirrup hung in the air unanswered. The house remained, dark, silent, implacable. Shade's shoulders slumped, the fierce energy draining out of her, replaced by a profound dejection Sarah could feel radiating across the space between them. The cat lowered her head, sniffing at the disturbed earth, then nudged the pale object half-heartedly with her nose. It rolled slightly, catching the light fully. It wasn't a saucer. It was a small, delicate figurine. A porcelain cat. Chipped and dirt-stained but unmistakably feline, lying on its side. And beside it, half-buried where Shade had been digging, Sarah's flashlight beam glinted on something, metallic. Another key? Or the glint was different. Smaller, rounder, like a locket. Shade looked up then, finally sensing Sarah's presence. Her green eyes met Sarah's across the beam of light. There was no fear this time, only a deep, aching sadness, and a silent plea Sarah couldn't begin to decipher. The cat took one step towards the hole, then stopped, looking back at Sarah. Waiting. The message was clear, shattering in its vulnerability. "Help me, please." Sarah stood at the edge of the overgrown lot, the damp grass soaking her feet, the weight of Shade's silent plea anchoring her to the spot. The world had shrunk to the beam of her flashlight, the small, sad-eyed tabby, the freshly dug earth, and the glint of porcelain and metal that whispered of stories buried long ago. Something was terribly, heartbreakingly wrong. Not just a missing cat, but a mystery tied to this forgotten place and the silent creature who guarded its secrets. The fragile trust they'd built quivered in the night air. Sarah took a shaky step forward. She had to know. She had to help. The beam of Sarah's flashlight trembled, painting shaky circles on the damp, tangled grass. The air in the vacant lot hung thick and silent, broken only by the frantic thudding of her own heart and Shade's soft, panting breaths. The small tabby stood frozen beside the shallow hole she'd dug near the crumbling porch steps of Mrs. Gable's boarded-up house. Her green eyes, wide and luminous in the artificial light, held Sarah's with an intensity that bypassed words. It wasn't just sadness Sarah saw now, reflected back at her. It was a raw, desperate plea. "Help me! Please! Find them!" The porcelain cat figurine lay on its side where Shade had nudged it, chipped and stained by years of earth. Beside it, half buried, the glint of metal Sarah had spotted. Not another key, but a small, tarnished oval. Locket, its delicate chain tangled in the roots of a stubborn weed. Shade looked from the locket to Sarah, then back to the hole, a low, questioning chirrup escaping her throat. It was the same sound Sarah had heard moments before, filled with a yearning that cracked open something deep within her. Sarah took another step forward, the cool dew soaking through her thin pajama pants, sending a shiver up her legs that had nothing to do with the temperature. The abandoned house loomed over them, its boarded windows like sightless eyes, radiating neglect and forgotten time. "Okay, Shade," she whispered, her voice sounding thin and alien in the vast quiet. "Okay, girl, show me." She knelt in the damp grass, ignoring the cold earth seeping into her knees, the scratch of weeds against her skin. The beam of the flashlight focused on the disturbed patch of earth. Shade watched, tense but unmoving, her tail twitching restlessly. Sarah reached out, her fingers trembling. She brushed away loose soil, carefully disentangling the lockets. Chain from the root, it was cold and gritty in her palm. She held it up. It was simple, old, the metal worn smooth in places. A tiny clasp held it shut. Her thumb hovered over it, a sudden wave of vertigo washing over her. What secrets did this hold? Whose face might be inside? Shade's mournful chirrup echoed again, softer this time, urging her on. With a click that seemed unnaturally loud, the locket sprang open. Sarah's breath hitched. Inside, protected by a thin, cloudy piece of glass, were two tiny photographs, faded and water-stained, but unmistakable. One showed a much younger woman with kind eyes and soft, silvering hair, swept into a bun. Mrs. Gable, Sarah realized with a jolt, recognizing her from fleeting childhood memories of the reclusive neighbor. The other photograph was of a cat, a small, sleek tabby kitten with wide, curious eyes and distinctive swirling stripes. Sarah's gaze snapped to Shade. The resemblance was uncanny. The markings, the shape of the face, this was Shade as a kitten, held close, loved, captured in a moment of innocent curiosity. Mrs. Gable's cat. The realization slammed into Sarah like a physical blow. Shade hadn't just wandered here. This wasn't just territory. This was home, or what remained of it. Mrs. Gable had passed away years ago. The house had stood empty, decaying. And Shade had been waiting, coming back, digging, calling out, not for something buried, but for someone, for the woman who had held her as a kitten, whose face was captured in this tiny locket. The watchfulness, the staring down the street, the refusal to fully trust Sarah's porch sanctuary. It wasn't aloofness. It was loyalty. It was grief. A cat's profound, enduring grief for her lost person. Tears blurred Sarah's vision, hot and sudden. She looked at Shade, truly looked at her, seeing past the stray's wariness to the heartbroken creature beneath. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah choked out, the endearment thick with understanding and shared sorrow. "You were waiting for her. All this time. You were waiting for her to come home." Her voice broke on the last word. The weight of Shade's silent vigil, the depth of her feline loyalty, crashed over Sarah, mingling with her own raw grief for Ben. Loss recognized loss. The dam holding back her own tears shattered. Sobs racked her body, silent at first. Then, escaping as ragged gasps. She doubled over, the cold locket clutched tight in her fist, her forehead pressing into the damp earth beside the hole Shade had dug. The flashlight fell from her nerveless fingers, its beam casting long, dancing shadows. She cried for Mrs. Gable, alone and forgotten. She cried for Shade, loyal and lost. She cried for Ben, whose absence was a constant ache. She cried for the sheer, heartbreaking beauty of a love that persisted beyond death, etched in the expectant gaze of a tabby cat staring at a boarded-up door. A warm, rough pressure nudged her hand. Sarah flinched, lifting her tear-streaked face. Shade was there, not watching from a distance, not wary. She had crossed the small space Sarah had instinctively maintained. She stood beside her, her small body pressed lightly against Sarah's trembling arm. Her green eyes, no longer clouded with that deep, searching sadness, looked directly into Sarah's. They held a different kind of intensity now, not pleading, but understanding. Shared sorrow? Shade lowered her head and gently, deliberately, pressed her forehead against Sarah's knuckles, where they clutched the locket. It wasn't a nuzzle for affection. It was a gesture of profound connection, a silent acknowledgement of the storm raging inside the human kneeling in the dirt, a small, warm anchor in the sea of grief. The touch, so simple, so unexpected, shattered Sarah completely. A fresh wave of sobs tore through her. She didn't reach out to grab Shade, didn't try to pull her close. She just let her hand rest there, under the small, solid weight of the cat's head, feeling the soft fur, the slight vibration that wasn't quite a purr, but a deep, resonant hum of presence. Shade stayed. She pressed closer, her body heat, a tangible comfort against Sarah's chilled skin. She didn't try to fix the tears. She simply bore witness. She offered the only comfort she knew, steadfast companionship in the face of overwhelming sorrow. Time lost meaning. Sarah wept until she was empty, her tears drying into salty tracks on her dusty cheeks. Shade remained pressed against her arm, a silent, warm sentinel. The flashlight beam illuminated the porcelain cat, the open locket in Sarah's palm, and Shade's steady gaze. The abandoned house watched, silent and dark, but the oppressive weight of its neglect seemed lessened. A fragile peace settled over the overgrown lot, born of shared grief and unexpected solace. Eventually, Sarah's breathing evened out. The raw edge of the emotional storm blunted. She took a shuddering breath, lifting her head. Shade lifted hers, too, her green eyes searching Sarah's face. Sarah managed a watery, tremulous smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She slowly, carefully, uncurled her fingers from the locket. She held it out towards Shade. "This is yours. She loved you. I see that." Shade looked at the locket, then back at Sarah. She didn't take it. Instead, she nudged Sarah's hand gently again with her head, then turned her attention back to the shallow hole. She pawed lightly at the dirt near the porcelain cat figurine, then looked pointedly at Sarah, a soft Miss RP escaping her. Understanding dawned, soft and clear. It wasn't just about finding the locket. It was about what lay beneath. Sarah nodded, wiping her face with the back of her free hand. "Okay," she breathed. "Show me." She picked up the flashlight, her hands steadier now. Shade watched intently as Sarah began to dig where the cat had indicated, near the foundation of the porch steps beside the little porcelain figure. The earth was softer here, looser than the compacted soil nearby. Sarah dug with her hands, scraping away dirt, her fingers encountering something solid and smooth just a few inches down. Not rock, wood. Her heart hammered again, but with a different energy now, anticipation mixed with reverence. She carefully cleared the dirt away, revealing a small, sturdy wooden box about the size of a shoebox, weathered but intact. It had no lock, just a simple brass latch, stiff with age and grime. Shade let out another soft chirrup, stepping closer, her nose almost touching the box. Her tail twitched, not in agitation but in recognition, eagerness. Sarah lifted the box from its earthy resting place. It was surprisingly heavy. She placed it on the relatively flat surface of the crumbling bottom step. Shade immediately hopped up beside it, sitting tall, her gaze fixed on the latch. Sarah's fingers fumbled with the stiff metal. It resisted, then gave with a rusty squeak. She took a deep breath and lifted the lid. The smell that wafted out was a complex tapestry: damp earth, old paper, cedar wood, and the faint, lingering ghost of lavender. Inside, carefully nestled in faded blue velvet, lay an assortment of objects that spoke of a quiet, cherished life. A small, well-worn leather collar with a tiny, tarnished bell. A collection of smooth, river-worn stones. A few faded photographs. Mrs. Gable smiling in a sun-drenched garden, a much younger Shade, clearly the kitten in the locket, perched proudly on her shoulder. Another of Shade curled contentedly on a floral armchair, and tucked in the corner, a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon, addressed in a spidery hand to "My dearest Eleanor," Mrs. Gable's first name, Sarah remembered vaguely. Beneath them lay a small leather-bound notebook. Sarah carefully lifted the collar. The tiny bell gave a faint, hollow chime. Shade leaned forward, sniffing it intently, a low, rumbling purr starting deep in her chest, the first true purr Sarah had ever heard from her. It was a sound of profound recognition, of memory flooding back. Shade nudged the collar gently with her nose, then looked up at Sarah, her green eyes bright, almost relieved. "This was yours," Sarah murmured, her throat tight again, but with wonder now, not sorrow. She held the collar out. Shade sniffed it again, then, incredibly, she ducked her head, nudging it towards Sarah's hand. An offering? A request? Sarah understood. With trembling fingers, she gently fastened the small, leather collar around Shade's neck. It was a little loose now. Shade was older, leaner than the kitten in the photos. The tiny bell gave a soft, sweet jingle as Shade shook her head slightly, getting used to the familiar weight. She looked up at Sarah, and in that gaze, Sarah saw the layers finally settle. The searching sadness hadn't vanished, but it was, overlaid now with a profound sense of belonging. The mystery hadn't been solved, it had been honored. Shade's vigil hadn't been in vain. She had found her person's treasures, and in doing so, perhaps found a way to carry her forward. Sarah gently lifted the small leather-bound notebook from the box. The cover was soft with age. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Mrs. Gable's elegant, flowing script. Diaries. Sarah's eyes scanned the first entry she saw. October 12th. Little Shadow followed me home from the market today. Skinny as a rail, but eyes like emeralds. Offered milk, which she lapped with surprising delicacy. Seems she has adopted me. The house feels less empty already. Named her Shade for the way she moves like twilight. Shade, the name Sarah had, given her, intuitively, unknowingly echoing the name her true person had chosen years before. The synchronicity stole Sarah's breath. She looked at the cat, now sitting regally on the step, the small bell at her throat glinting dully in the flashlight beam. Shade met her gaze and offered a slow, deliberate blink. A blink filled with a depth of understanding that transcended species. It was a thank you, an acknowledgement, a passing of the torch. In that quiet, overgrown lot, illuminated by a single flashlight beam, surrounded by the relics of a love story between a woman and her cat, Sarah finally understood. Shade hadn't just saved Ollie. She hadn't just been waiting for Mrs. Gable. She had been waiting for Sarah. Not to replace her, lost person, but to find a new place to anchor her fierce loyalty, her capacity for love. She had chosen Sarah, not just as a source of food or shelter, but as the keeper of her story, the witness to her grief, and now the guardian of her past. The silent watcher had not only leapt to save a child, she had, in her own way, been saving Sarah all along, guiding her out of the isolating depths of her own grief and into a shared space of remembrance and connection. The storm of tears had passed. In its wake, bathed in the soft glow of revelation and the quiet chime of a rediscovered bell, Sarah felt a profound shift. She wasn't just offering shelter anymore. She was home. And Shade, the tabby who wouldn't, back down, the guardian of ghosts, the hero with emerald eyes, was finally, truly, coming home. The first frost came early that year, painting the grass in silver and making the fallen leaves crunch underfoot like brittle paper. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, steaming mug of coffee, warming her hands, watching the dawn light creep across the backyard. The hydrangea bush, now bare of blooms, stood skeletal in the cold, its branches tipped with ice. No shadow lurked beneath it anymore. No silent watcher waited in the twilight, because Shade was inside now. She lay sprawled across the back of the living room sofa like a queen holding court, her chin resting on Ollie's discarded stuffed dinosaur, her tail twitching occasionally in contented half-dreams. The little bell on her collar, Mrs. Gable's bell, tinkled softly with each breath. Sunlight streamed through the window, turning her stripes into bands of gold and charcoal, her fur thicker now with the approach of winter. Her body relaxed in a way Sarah had never seen before. No tension, no watchfulness, just peace. It had taken time, of course. The night in the vacant lot had been a turning point, but not an instant fix. Shade hadn't magically transformed into a cuddly house cat. She still had her boundaries, her moments of aloofness, her silent retreats to high perches where she could observe the household like a tiny, furry sovereign. But she no longer vanished for hours, no longer stared down the street as if waiting for someone who would never come. The collar had changed something, not just for Shade, but for Sarah too. It was a tangible link to the woman who had loved her first, a reminder that love wasn't finite. That grief could coexist with new beginnings. Ollie had been the final key. One chilly afternoon, Sarah had been unpacking the box from Mrs. Gable's yard, carefully cleaning the photographs, airing out the letters, setting the little porcelain cat figurine on the mantel where Shade could see it. Ollie, ever curious, had toddled over, his small fingers reaching for the smooth stones. "Mama, what's that?" "Treasures, sweet pea. They belonged to Shade's first mama." Ollie had frowned, processing this. Then, with the brutal simplicity of toddlers, he'd declared, "Now she our kitty." And Shade, as if she'd been waiting for permission, had stepped forward. Not away, not to the safety of a high shelf, but forward towards Ollie. She'd sniffed his outstretched hand, her bell jingling, and then, miraculously, allowed him to clumsily pat her head. Sarah had held her breath. Ollie had beamed. "Nice kitty." And Shade had purred. That had been the true beginning. Now, months later, the house was different, warmer. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was companionable, filled with the soft sounds of Shade's paws on hardwood, the occasional chime of her bell, Ollie's giggles as she batted at his shoelaces. Sarah still missed Ben. She always would. But the grief wasn't a crushing weight now. It was a quiet companion, like the shadow of a tree on a sunny day. And then, one morning, the final gift came. Sarah was sorting through the last of Mrs. Gable's letters she'd hesitated to read, feeling like an intruder on private words. But something had nudged her to open one. Maybe it was Shade, sitting beside her on the couch, her green eyes knowing. The letter was dated just weeks before Mrs. Gable's passing. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. "I know my time is short, but I write this with a light heart, for I have made arrangements for my little shadow. The Morris family down the lane have agreed to take her, though she does not know them yet. She is a creature of habit, my girl. She will not understand at first, but I trust she will learn to love again. She has too much love in her to let it wither with me." Sarah's breath caught. The Morris family. They had moved away years ago, long before Sarah and Ben had bought this house. They had never come for Shade. And yet, Shade had stayed. She had waited, and then, when the time was right, she had chosen Sarah, not as a replacement, but as a new chapter. Sarah set the letter down, her vision blurring. Shade, sensing the shift, stretched and then patted over, butting her head gently against Sarah's arm. Not demanding, just present. Sarah stroked her fur, the bell chiming, softly. "You found us," she whispered, "and we found you." Shade blinked up at her, slow and deliberate. Then she curled into Sarah's lap, her purr a deep, resonant hum against Sarah's chest. Outside, the first true snow began to fall, blanketing the world in quiet. And inside, for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt whole. "You stayed till the end. Thank you." If it felt like a soft hug or a warm purr in your heart, subscribing lets me bring you more moments like this.